Thank you very much, Paul Bashaw and Mohammed, for your illuminating paper, which actually nicely complemented the first paper by John. And I can only say is that I wish a lot of those ethical guidelines were still being enforced today. We'd be living in a different world, wouldn't we? Our third speaker is Sahar Khamis, who is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. And the title of her presentation is Defending Democracy in the Muslim World, A Path to Justice, Stability, and Prosperity. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, because the title was actually given on top of the speaker's name. Let me rephrase that. I just gave you the title of the last presentation, and actually she will be speaking on transnational online repression and resistance, gendered digital activism to advance democracy in the Muslim world. That's the continuing, I think, what Mohammed had started talking about in terms of gendered activities.
All right, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Peace be upon you. Morning. So happy and honored to be with you in another great Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy conference. Thanks to Center for Islam and Democracy and also for MPAC, Muslim Public Affairs Council, for putting together this important and timely conference. I cannot think of a more important and timely moment to talk about the issue of authoritarianism and the need to stand against authoritarianism than the moment that we are facing now, regionally, internationally, domestically, you name it. And just very briefly, I want to make sure this is working here in terms of the slides. My topic is transnational repression and resistance, gendered activism to advance democracy in the Muslim world. So before we start, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an Egyptian-American communication scholar, and I've been conducting qualitative, ethnographic, and feminist research with a special focus on media dynamics in the Arab world and the Muslim world. My investigation has always focused on Arab and Muslim women, and it's a particular area of interest for me. Women's multiple resistances and multiple roles and activisms in the Arab and Muslim world, whether they are journalists, whether they are opponents, dissidents, activists, you name it. There's actually some kind of overlap between these categories, as my presentation is gonna show. And I am the co-editor of the book Arab Women's Activism and Socio-Political Transformation, Unfinished Gendered Revolutions. So some of my findings in this study are based on some of the topics and themes discussed in this book. Next, please. So about this study, of course we know that more than a decade ago, the Arab Spring uprisings have erupted and brought about a wide array of outcomes unfolded, of course, in these different countries. And of course, as we all know as well, women played a very important and pivotal role in the midst of these uprisings. Politically, socially, economically, they have been an important cornerstone for the initial success of the Arab Spring uprisings before things went in a wrong direction. We're going to talk about that also in a moment. But initially, what we have seen in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, is that we have seen some kind of regime change and things were looking favorable, at least at the beginning, before things started to go in a negative direction. So this study is based on interviews with 20 women activists, journalists, opponents, dissidents for different countries, 4 countries in particular, Egypt, Bahrain, Syria, and Tunisia. And of course, the names here are changed to keep them anonymous and protect their own privacy, except in a case where there's actually a journalist from Bahrain who said it's okay to use her real name. So I did that. Of course, the interviews were done over Zoom and Skype because of the geographic location. The importance of the study, very quickly, I will say it's very important to focus on women because not just I'm a professor of communication, also an affiliate professor of gender and women's studies, but mainly because women are half of society and they give birth to the second half. So we cannot talk about issues of development or advancement or democracy or change without talking about women and women's important role. It's also very important to deconstruct some of the myths and the stereotypes about Arab women / Muslim women who are usually misportrayed or misrepresented. as weak and helpless and powerless, or simply as sexualized objects, or all of the above. So when you see images of women who are resisting, and many times with great risk to their own safety and the safety and welfare of their own families, putting themselves at risk of being arrested, harassed, detained, or even killed, that immediately changes many of these negative misperceptions, stereotypes, and myths about Arab and Muslim women. Of course, women have also suffered, Arab women and Muslim women in particular, from 3 layers of invisibility. Invisibility in everyday life, where their work and labor is oftentimes not recognized as quote-unquote work, because they don't receive a paycheck every week or every couple of weeks. So therefore, it's informal and undocumented labor. Also invisibility in academia, that has not been giving them a fair share of the attention they deserve. And of course, invisibility and misrepresentation in the media as well, through some of these stereotypes and misrepresentations. So it's very important to try to overcome these layers of invisibility. And illustrating as well the different activisms, resistances, and feminisms of these Arab and Muslim women. And I'm using here the plural on purpose, because I don't believe that there is one-size-fits-all activism, or one-size-fits-all resistance, or one-size-fits-all feminism. So we have to talk about all of these in the plural, using the plural as activism, resistances, and feminisms. It is also very important here to talk about a very important phenomenon that this presentation is focusing on, which is the phenomena of cyber-feminism. Cyber-feminism, simply put, is the sister term for cyber activism. And cyber activism is the use of social media and new media in order to bring about change, to fight authoritarianism, to bring about some kind of positive social and political change in society. That is the phenomena of cyber activism. The sister term is cyber feminism. It's when women themselves try to take the digital media and social media in their own hands in order to bring about some kind of favorable change in their own societies. And in that particular sense, we can say that women are fighting what we can describe as a dual struggle. In other words, they're joining their male counterparts, their fellow male citizens, in the struggle against dictatorship and authoritarianism. They're fighting against dictatorial regimes in the Arab/Muslim world, but they're also having a parallel dual struggle to also fight against patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, discrimination, and many other things that are impacting Arab and Muslim women in particular. So it's very important to talk about all of these issues and the role of new media and social media as important tools which are used by Arab/Muslim women in this regard. Next, please. So cyber feminism in the Arab Spring, it is not a secret, of course, that women played very, very important roles during the Arab Spring movements, not just as quote-unquote supporters of the fellow male citizens, or helping them in some kind of way, or nurturing them. No, they were actually at the front lines of resistance, risking their own lives, risking their own bodies. Very much activists and leaders. In many cases, we're going to see examples of leadership of some of these women in certain movements against autocracy and dictatorship and authoritarianism. Some of them were harassed, some of them were detained, arrested, killed, you name it. So they were very, very active and very much outspoken. And it's a very important thing to say that this particular moment showed some kind of grassroots activism across the board. It was trying to defy the top-down tokenism that existed before that in terms of the First Lady syndrome. Whatever the First Lady does or says gets the attention of the media. No, now it's the grassroots movement across the board. Everybody is participating from every corner of society, young, old, women, men, you name. And of course, this iconic image from the heart of Tahrir Square in Egypt is very, very iconic. Whenever I talk about the Arab Spring, I always bring about this iconic image. Next, please. And this is another one of my favorite iconic images as well. This is a very much middle-class Egyptian woman in the heart of Tahrir Square, trying to play a role in her own society and bring attention to issues of imprisonment and detention. This is Wa'il Ghunaim. He was one of the iconic figures in the revolution. And this woman was actually showing his image and saying, this guy was just detained, he was just arrested. When are we going to stop using things like the emergency law? When are we going to stop these kinds of, arbitrary detentions and arrests? And that's another iconic image of how social media in particular, Facebook, Twitter, played a very important pivotal role in the midst of these uprisings. So that's another one of my favorite images as well. However, this is a very important moment of redefining what activism and resistance actually means, just like we were talking a moment ago about the indigenous, autonomous, bottom-up rather than top-down activism and resistance, which is coming from the grassroots, not from the top-down, but from the bottom-up, and engulfing different segments of society and different sectors of society across the board. Even women themselves, some of them were rich, some of them were poor, some of them were Muslims, some of them were Coptic Christians, you name it. I mean, there was this kind of inclusive moment of solidarity and unity. That is very important. And we also talked about the parallel revolution or the dual struggle of women in that particular sense, the socio-political kind of resistance and activism they have been engaging in. Next, please. The contributions of cyberfeminism, the digital media tools gave these women very, very important tools to mobilize, to organize, and to confront authoritarianism and dictatorship, to create some kind of resistance movements. It gave them the opportunity to amplify their own voices and to be heard, not just domestically or locally, but also regionally and internationally, bringing about awareness to issues like corruption, violations of human rights, sexism, misogyny, and other types of pressures that they were facing. The post-Arab Spring landscape, unfortunately, looks very different, with the reversals in the course of democracy in many of the so-called quote-unquote post-Arab Spring countries. We are seeing what we can describe as authoritarian adaptation and reassertion. In other words, these regimes are now, 3 minutes, okay. These regimes are now reinventing themselves again and starting to use measures like repression, arrests, detention, forcible disappearance. In the case of women in particular, they faced additional layers of doxing, trolling, character assassination, shaming on social media, profiling, and the list can go on and on and on. However, they started to use social media to create some kind of resistance, using 3 very important tactics: mobilization, documentation, and education. Mobilization is trying to bring people together in action. Let's organize a protest. Let's organize some kind of movement on the ground. Let's do something about it. And documentation, if anybody tries to arrest me or harass me or detain me, I'm going to use my cell phone camera as my weapon. I'm going to document this moment and I'm going to share it. It's going to go viral all over social media and on YouTube. And education is bringing awareness to society itself about the importance of democracy and the importance of women's rights. So they're engaging in 3 parallel struggles very quickly: a political struggle, a social struggle, and a legal struggle. The political struggle, of course, is pushing back against the governments which are authoritarian and dictatorial. One good example is a group called No Military Trials for Civilians, which was created by women lawyers and leaders in Egypt in order to try to stop any kind of military trial for any civilian in Egypt. Next slide, please. The social struggle pushing back against an issue like sexual harassment, which impacts women in particular, creating groups like Shuft Taharrush, which means I saw harassment, and Harass Map, which shows the places where these types of harassment are actually taking place. And the third one is the legal struggle. The legal struggle is often a blind spot. People don't talk about it, but it's very important to change the laws and regulations which are very much discriminating against women. Women were successful, for example, in the case of Tunisia, to create a new law which defines gendered violence not just as domestic violence, but as political violence, social violence, economic violence, any type of violence that women face in any sphere of society. So when we look at these 3 parallel struggles, we can clearly see how women were using the social media tools they have at their disposal in order to create positive change in their own societies and to create some kind of shift away from authoritarianism, dictatorship, autocracy, and to create some kind of favorable and positive change in their own societies. Next, please. Yes. So there are some gains and opportunities for sure. Women were able to increase the visibility of their own issues, of their own struggles, to speak up to bring about international awareness, to bring about a lot of visibility for their own causes. And many of these women became role models, not just for other women, but even for young men and for society as a whole. Next, please. Also, they were able to really become leaders in their own right in the political, social, economic, and legal spheres, therefore shattering many of the myths and stereotypes we were talking about earlier, and setting a new stage and a new phase for activism and resistance in the Arab/Muslim world. Next, please. However, there are a lot of threats and challenges as well. We have to say that the reversals in the process of democracy and democratization in this region meant also huge challenges for women. The shift from solidarity to fragmentation, from unity to polarization, the persistence of some of the negative practices and patriarchy and other negative traditions that are still impacting women, and for some people on the secular/liberal camp, they see the rise of political Islam as also a challenge. The limitations of cyberfeminism, just like everything else in life. Yes, we talked about all of these potentialities and all of these great things about cyberfeminism, but it's not a magical stick. It is not a magic stick or a magic tool. It can only go so far. It has to be the people on the ground, in this case the women on the ground themselves, who actually bring about change whenever they decide to do so and however they decide to do so. It's not an end-all, be-all. It's not like, oh, we have the digital tools, next thing we're going to have democracy. That is not the case. So to conclude, we are actually seeing some potentialities, limitations, and future prospects for gender diasporic resistance. Of course, as you can imagine, with the reversals in democracy in this part of the world, many activists, including women activists, started to leave their own countries and exercise their own activism and resistance from the diaspora. But even there, in the diaspora, they are not free of government persecution, of government intimidation going after them. We saw what happened with Jamal Khashoggi in the case of Saudi Arabia. He is not the only one, but the most famous example. So yes, you can bring about amplifying the voices of opposition and dissent. You can bring about more attention and visibility internationally, but still there are limitations and still there are threats even in the diaspora. Next, please. So these women succeeded to bring about this attention, but we can see that there is a limited trickle-down effect. In other words, when you are creating a movement in the diaspora, usually it does not trickle down to the wider segments of society, because people see you as living in the safety of Arlington, Virginia. You are not really on the ground in Tahrir Square. You are not on the ground in Tunisia or Syria. So what are you talking about? So it has some kind of limited credibility and limited on-the-ground effect, and that is one of the limitations of activism in the diaspora. And finally, a very last final word, we need to really adopt what we can call a middle ground. We don't want to be in the extremes of too much optimism or too much pessimism, because both of them are unfavorable extremes. Whether in terms of talking about the phenomena of cyber activism and cyber feminism, we need to stay away from what we call cyber pessimism or cyber optimism, and to adopt the middle ground of cyber realism. See it for what it is, acknowledge the powers and the strengths, but also the weaknesses and the limitations. And the same thing when we talk about the future of democracy and activism and resistance in this part of the world. We need to acknowledge what has been done, what has been achieved, but we also need to be honest about what remains to be done and the threats and challenges ahead. Thank you so much.